No mai, haere mai, and welcome to this very special series of Tapatahi, where we hear inspirational stories from our dames and knights who've made a huge impact on Te Ao Māori. Today we speak to brothers Sir Mason and Sir Eddie Jury, a whānau with not one but two knighthoods. Older brother Sir Mason Jury became one of the first Māori psychiatrists and dedicated his entire life to Māori health and education. He's left a lasting legacy, and today his focus is on his whānau. Sir Mason Jury rarely gives interviews. He only agreed to sit down and chat to us on one condition, that the interview could be conducted at Aorangi Marae in Fielding.
Particularly wanted to have it here because this is a house where a lot of development has occurred for me, but for our family, for our whānau, for our hapu, and I want that to be part of it. It's an integral part of the story. Getting into trouble, playing rugby on the marae after the pōhiri had taken place. These were the things that we did when we were young. When I came to live right here, we've become, I guess, more part of the kaitiakitanga of this marae, and we'll continue to do that.
He says his grandfather and namesake, John Mason Jury, was a major influence in his life.
He also spent his life contributing a great deal to this marae. He was encouraging always of us to to better ourselves and to be useful to others. He always had the saying, make yourself useful. He really played an important part for all of us, my brothers, my cousins, all of us who are growing up here.
Professor Sir Mason Jury of Fielding.
Sir Mason Jury became the pride of his people when he was knighted in 2009 for services to Māori health and public service.
I had some mixed feelings about it. It took me a long time to sort of get used to people calling me sir, and still feels a bit awkward. But basically, it didn't change me, and it hasn't changed the direction I've been moving in. Our father would probably have said, is this going to help me with my work on the farm? Would have been his reaction. He was a very practical man. He expected us to be practical as well and to help whenever we could. Well, my mother had gone before this happened, and my father would have, I think, would have just said, well, that's good news, now can you come and help me cut the wood?
Sir Mason followed in the footsteps of his younger brother, Sir Edward Jury, a former lawyer and judge who was knighted in 2009. The siblings have always been best mates.
One of the early days I remember is dubbing him to school. We used to put him on the bar and we'd ride the bike in. That's one of the very early memories. We both went to Te Aute later on, and then he went to Victoria University, I went to Otago University. Caught up in semester breaks and holidays. We grew really in the shadow of our older brother, Ra, and he was sort of the leader for us in those days, and he used to tell us what to do, organise our games. So we were really quite a tight trio. There was always someone in charge. It usually wasn't me, it was usually our older brother. We probably were able to share most of our things, and we knew that there was always someone to back us up.
Sir Mason has always been passionate about medicine and became one of our top psychiatrists.
When I went to university early on, I had in mind that I would do medicine, and it may have been the stories I was beginning to hear about poor Murray and Buck. It may have been a message I had from my grandfather at one point that he thought one of us should be a doctor. So I went to Otago with a clear intention that that's what I would be doing. After graduating, of course, you spend time as a house surgeon. I spent 2 years at the Palmerston North Hospital, and rotating between paediatrics, surgery, accident and emergency, obstetrics and gynecology, the whole range of specialties. But I also spent 3 months in psychiatry. And I found that was a rather different specialty to the others, insofar as it dwelt much more on people and what people were feeling and thinking, rather than on an organ that wasn't working too well. And so I decided then, this is probably 65, that's what I would do would be psychiatry. To do that, then you couldn't do it in New Zealand, you had to go overseas. So my wife and I went to Montreal in Canada, McGill University, where they had a great 4-year postgraduate program in psychiatry, completed that, and then came back to Palmerston North to practice psychiatry. What I discovered, though, when I was working there is that the conventional approaches in psychiatry were not working that well with Māori patients. So what I'd learned over in Canada was really helpful, but applying it in the context of Māori patients required a different approach. And I began to think that there were things missing. One of the problems in psychiatry then, not so much now, but then, was that the mind and the body were separated. We would look only at the mind and not be concerned about the body, or about the whānau, or about the wider wairua that people might have. The focus should not be only on the diagnosis. More importantly, it should be on the whole person.
Sir Mason expanded his interests when he was appointed to the Royal Commission of Social Policy in 1986.
That opened a whole new world to me, because social policy really was about health, but it was also about housing, social income, family life. It was a huge look at the world. Yeah, and the other thing that my contribution there was also introducing the notion that the Treaty of Waitangi was as important to social policy as it was to land policy. At that time, talking about the treaty usually finished up talking about land. But we, the Commission, in the end of our report, we published the 3 principles of participation, protection and partnership as 3 major treaty principles that needed to be taken into account in all social services, whether it's health or housing or education. So that really began to change.
Coming up after the break.
It was inspiring. We used to hear about their stories. Remember, they came through in the early 1900s. What they told us was that when times are tough, there's a way through it, and there's a way to make a contribution.
Welcome back. Sir Mason Jury attended Te Aute College with his 2 brothers. He attributes the Māori boarding school and its esteemed former pupils as a major reason for his success.
When Sir Mason Jury was appointed to the Royal Commission of Social Policy, his career changed focus from medicine to education.
I came back briefly to work at the hospital and was then asked to go to Massey University to head the newly formed Māori Studies Department, which I did. And that was then a new phase in my career, which was much more about Māori education, tertiary education, and career opportunities from that, than it was about treating patients in hospitals.
Sir Mason's passion for education developed when he attended Te Aute College.
It was a small school. When I went there, I think there were only about 130, and that fluctuated between 130 and 110. So a small school like that, you know everybody, you know where they come from. Inevitably, you find that you're related to people that you sort of hadn't realised in the past. So I think the smallness of it was good. The academic contribution was tremendous. I had a really good academic experience there, a lot of encouragement. Actually, looking back on it, all of the boys there were involved regularly in 2-hour sessions every night for homework and structured tuition, structured tutoring. So I think it prepared me well.
He was determined to follow in the footsteps of former Te Aute students like Sir Apirana Ngata and Sir Maui Pomare.
It was inspiring. We used to hear about their stories. Remember, they came through in the early 1900s. What they told us was that when times are tough, there's a way through it, and there's a way to make a contribution. Because that's what they did. They went through difficult times and made huge contributions to then, and we still live with those contributions.
Sir Mason says his success would not have been possible without the support from others, and he wants to give back by providing opportunities for Māori students.
I'd had a lot of support over the years. I had scholarships, the Otaki Puerua Trust Board scholarship all the time I was at Te Aute. I had a Ngākau scholarship when I went to university. I had a postgraduate Ngākau scholarship when I went to Montreal. When you do that, you are not only getting a scholarship, but you're making a commitment to give back what you've received. And I think that commitment has been with me, that I was soon realised that all of the efforts and ones that my parents had, my grandparents had, making sure that I could get educated and could get opportunities, we were moving into an era that many of the old approaches were not going to work. So that's the commitment, I think, came from the support I had received. I had to look at how I might add my own contribution to compensate for what I'd taken.
At 84, Sir Mason continues to transform and advocate for Māori health. He recently chaired a steering group that appointed the board responsible for the new Māori Health Authority.
I think the thing that we've come to is to realise that the Centre for Māori Health has got to be with whānau. But a huge step came with the creation of Whānau Water, which really wasn't just about health, it wasn't just about education, it was about all those things coming together. It's the coming together of those which really are about Māori realities in today. It's never been about me, actually. It's always been about what needs to be done, and I've had that sort of sense. What needs to be done, I pick up from the voices that I hear coming from our own people, from our own communities, from our own whānau. That's the key as to what needs to be done.
Sir Eddie Jury, a former lawyer and Māori Land Court judge, grew up in the shadow of his older brother, but he says the friendly sibling rivalry motivated him to succeed.
The Honourable Sir Edward Jury of Lower Hutt.
When Sir Edward Taihakure Jury received his knighthood in 2009 for a long-standing career in law, it was a way for him to acknowledge the support he's received from his iwi.
The first question, I suppose, was whether or not one should take on such a title, given its very colonial origins. But so I did discuss it with a number of others who were around at the time, and they were very adamant that this should be taken, especially since Ngāti Kaupata had not previously had a sir within the tribe.
Although he's 12 months younger, he was pleased to receive the knighthood before his brother, Sir Mason Jury.
It gave me a sense of personal satisfaction to know that I was knighted ahead of my brother, just because of ancient sibling rivalry, I suppose. It was a very friendly rivalry. My brother kept achieving things at Te Aute College, both brothers. I always wanted to beat them. I probably felt the rivalry more keenly than them because I was the youngest.
All three of the Jury brothers attended Te Aute College. Sir Eddie says the kura influenced his life.
We had grown up knowing only about our own tribe, but what one could sense at Te Aute College was a national Maori unity, as it were, in that we were all there from many tribes with the same kind of interest. Friendships were created there that have lasted me for the rest of my life.
Sir Eddie followed in the footsteps of his grandfather, John Mason Jury, and studied law.
He was one of those who born in the 1800s, who attended Te Aute College in the very early 1900s, I would think, who then went on to university where he took a law degree. And that was, there were only very, very few lawyers around at that time. He did not practice in law because his father passed on and he had to take over the farm. And he was a farmer for most of his working life, but he had been an interpreter and continued to be an interpreter for the Māori Land Court. He was the person who could head me in a particular direction. He was also a member of the Board of Māori Affairs, which was concerned with Māori land development. He did have a very big influence on my life. There is something very good in being able to offer assistance and advice to others, and then to have them give back to you their advice and their assistance from their own experiences. So I felt that he was able to contribute to the community, and it would be a good thing for all of us to be able to follow in that same pathway.
Although Te Aute College did not teach law, the school contributed to Sir Eddie's sense of justice in other ways.
My grandfather had expressed to the school the thought that I should become a lawyer, and they said, well, of course law is not something that is taught at secondary schools, but the headmaster in his wisdom thought that divinity was the next closest thing because it was all about maintaining a moral standard. It certainly helps to set a good moral basis for the development of any law. And the important thing about it is that the law that is taught there comes from the Middle East, not from our colonial forebears. When I started at the law school at Victoria University in 1958, there were two persons ahead of me who were doing law, and there were two persons who started in law at the same time as me. It's hard to understand why it was that Māori were not taking up the law course in large numbers at that time, because Māoris are such very good advocates and very good arguers for a particular point of view. I suppose what deterred a lot of people was that there was no place in the curriculum or in the practice of law at all in those days for the recognition of our own Māori law. But for me, the exciting part about going there was it gave one the prospect of opening up a new pathway and getting Māori into our understanding of law.
Sir Eddie became a successful lawyer and was the first Māori to be appointed a judge on the Māori Land Court in 1974.
I was asked to sit on the Māori Appellate Court to broaden my experience, and the issue was about the sale of shares in Māori land to a European. I took a different approach to it. I took the approach that the ownership of shares in Māori land carried a responsibility to behave in ways that did not prejudice the other owners in the group. So I declined the sale of those shares on that ground, on the ground that tikanga Māori had to be read into the statute. It could not be completely divorced from it.
Coming up after the break.
The then Minister of Māori Affairs, Koro Wetere, opened Pandora's box, as it was described at the time, by saying that the tribunal should be able to examine historic Māori claims.
No mai hoki mai. Sir Eddie Jury spent more than 20 years as a chairperson for the Waitangi Tribunal. He says the responsibility gave him a deeper understanding of Māori issues.
When I started at the law school, the idea that the treaty could be recognised in law was seen to be very unlikely. But the opening came when Henry Ngata, later Sir Henry from Ngāti Pro, wrote a paper about statutes that contravene the Treaty of Waitangi. And I thought that provided a very important opening, because what he was in fact saying was that government statutes could be measured against the treaty. It was a great opportunity for me to be able to be in there at the time that the first applications came in to the Waitangi Tribunal, and we were able to look more thoroughly at how this treaty could be applied in ways that introduced tikanga Māori into our legal system.
When the Waitangi Tribunal was first established, it only dealt with contemporary claims, but that all changed in 1985.
The then Minister of Māori Affairs, Koro Wetere, opened Pandora's box, as it was described at the time, by saying that the tribunal should be able to examine historic Māori claims. The focus of the tribunal changed dramatically from that point on. It meant that all of our efforts had to go into the historic claims. And that was another outstanding period in the life of the tribunal, to be able to bring out that history.
Throughout his time with the Waitangi Tribunal, Sir Eddie saw the passion and drive Māori had in reclaiming their rights.
The one that gave me the greatest satisfaction, I think, would have been the Muri Whenua fishing report, because of the extraordinary knowledge that that Maori people from coastal areas, and I came from an inland area, that extraordinary and extensive knowledge that they had of Maori fishing practices. It was a real treasure trove of information that came out from that inquiry. These were the people of the very far north who lived bounded by the sea on all three sides, and whose livelihoods depended more than that of most people on what the sea could provide. It was unfortunate that we were unable to record all of what they had to say, and that was because they insisted upon telling us with just their own hapu present and with the other hapu not being there, and we soon discovered that that was because each hapu had its own secrets about the best place to fish, the right time of the year to fish, and what sort of lures might most apply. We didn't record any of that because it was their wish.
Today, Sir Eddie spends quality time with his wife, fellow lawyer Donna Hall, and is committed to his volunteer work.
I was very lucky for the wife that I have, because we both share the same interests, and she is probably more hard-working than I have ever been, and very much more committed. Since retiring in about 2015, I think, 2012, I think it was, I've worked entirely in a voluntary role. That was something that was just expected of my grandfather's generation and even of my father's generation. You were expected to give freely of your time when you came to your own people.
On the next show, we hear from Ngai Tahu Rangatira, Sir Mark Solomon and Sir Tipene O'Regan.
My wife picked it up and she said, do you want to be Sir Stephen or Sir Tipene? And I said, Sir Tipene. Even though my passport still goes as Stephen, I found the whole experience, as I say, mystifying to begin with. But when I found that our senior women were behind it, they're a bit of a fan club for me within the tribe.
1 out of every 6 New Zealand males has been sexually abused. 1 out of every 3 New Zealand females has been sexually abused. That's our data. But I would argue it's the most under-discussed issue in this country.